What's up? It's weebin' time. About to weeb all over this localized tabletop Hoyoverse. You want all the 5-star anime girls without spending $10,000 in developing a gambling addiction? Observe pastel-colored animated women. Actually, that one's apparently a twink who's absolutely killing it with those heels. Oh wait, that actually means roster's half-half boy-girl, but if so, why is everyone actually supermodel status? It's definitely from mewing. Bisexual panic aside, React is a 2-player tabletop dueler where different types of artists with superpowers fight each other by making their art come to life, with gameplay emphasizing card play and grid positioning. We've already covered the prototype 2 years ago, so kind of like with the Frosthaven review, the pros and cons here aren't going to be comprehensive, but will instead be based on what's changed in the final product. If you want a more complete understanding of React and our analysis, I highly recommend checking out the original prototype review. But if you don't care and just want to hear about whether or not the release version is good, I got you. In fact, quick re-explanation of the rules. Both players pick a character and try to deal 3 damage to their opponent to win. Damage is represented by flipping your 3 masterpiece cards, but they also double as trackers for your super beater, because if you place all 3 on the side here in correct orientation, your character finishes their magnum opus and starts to radiate aura in an anime funk edit. AKA you unlock their ascended state and get a super strong ability. Everyone starts with 4 cards from their character's deck, and a player's turn has 4 phases. First is Masterpiece phase, where you progress your masterpiece once. Then Draw phase, where both players draw 1 card. Then Main phase, where you actually get to play the game by playing cards. Fundamentally, all cards played will be either intentions or reactions. Intentions are always what you lead with, whereas reactions can only be played in response. If you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player, intentions are spell speed 1. MTG player, they're sorceries. Reactions are spell speed 2, or instance. However, unlike those TCGs, reactions can never be the first card played. Once an intention is played, both players pass back and forth playing reaction cards to the chain/stack. And once both players choose not to add to it, or it hits 5 cards, the cards all resolve in descending order, highest number first. Once the chain of cards begins resolving, it cannot be further modified from new cards. So it's like a Yu-Gi-Oh chain, not an MTG stack in that regard. Playable cards also come in the form of action cards and ability cards. Action cards go to a discard pile after resolving, while ability cards are cards that sit in front of you and always return there after you play them. So what's stopping you from just spamming a bunch of abilities if they come back? Well, cards can have costs detailed in their colored boxes, which must be paid beforehand, otherwise you can't play the card to the chain. Some common costs are exhausting your character for the turn, which just taps them sideways, picking a direction, picking a zone. And the reason why something like announcing a direction is a cost is because that means it's locked in. Your opponent knows and will respond accordingly, so they may even cause you to no longer want that direction. Whereas effects that don't have a cost let you decide how to use them when they actually resolve instead of the instant it's added to the chain. Once the turn player decides that they're done playing intentions, they can end their turn, which untaps or refreshes everything for both players. Next player starts again at Masterpiece phase. Now while that's fundamentally all the rules, in practice React goes crazy with the character asymmetry because everyone's got passives that do stuff. In fact, there's even characters who don't have a deck of action cards and only have ability cards. But even then, that's still using cards, and there's no default actions in the rules to do basic things like moving and attacking. If you want to do anything in game, you're always going to play a card to the chain and letting your opponent react. If you don't have a card somewhere that says move, you can't move. Finally, a quick disclaimer before pros and cons. This is a paid sponsored video courtesy of Brother Ming Games. Shout out for supporting ya boys. Try not to let that affect the scoring. Hopefully I'm doing a good job with it and the content speaks for itself. Anyways, pros! First off, the deluxe edition playmats got an art upgrade compared to before, because now we got unique art of all the characters instead of mats mostly being blank with the previous regular character splash art. Also, by the way, still the same deal as before. Standard edition $60, you get cardboard everything like the boards and characters. Deluxe is $100 with bigger box, playmats, and acrylic standees. However, like the upgraded playmat art for Deluxe, there's even more art upgrades to point out in general, which is kinda nuts because React's anime art beforehand was already popping with all the different types of cards and card backs. Like how all the characters have unique art for their Ascended Masterpiece versions. And IMO, these look way better than their regular art. To the point that I wish we got acrylic standees of it. Oh, would you look at that? The cardboard tile versions can flip over for the better art. Also, they're flat tiles now instead of cardboard standees, which completely fixes the prototype problem of visually and physically blocking the board. Then the Masterpiece cards all have unique art too. Same with the rulebook with these awesome simplified drawings that remind me of when you do a fast but happy little Bob Ross watercolor. And the box art has art everywhere on it and inside too. In fact, you even got this cool thing where you lift the lid and underneath is the Ascended Artist. Why is that art not on top? It looks so much cooler. What the fuck? Plus we got these little chibi babies too, because why the hell not? Next thing you know, they're gonna sell plushies of these and people are gonna go like, oh, I'm gonna weave, then plaster their rooms with them for maximum head pat potential. Always a plus to smother everything with as much high quality art as possible. Probably means the designer cares about artists too and paid out big money there, which in turn probably also means they super care about how the game feels. Very based. Looks maxing your board games as poggers, and I absolutely encourage creatives to partake in tabletop mogging. Cool, React is super stylish, but as for the onboarding experience, the rulebook and player aid cards get you going very quickly, which I would hope so, since this is a light medium-light game. But yeah, you really only have to read like 9 pages of rules with tons of pictures, while the rest of the rulebook is component diagrams and a glossary. How well did the 9 pages of gameplay work? Pretty good. It's setup, then turn overview, then explains all the turn phases. Pretty hard to fuck that up. Also, big fan of how any details / nuances to terminology is bullet pointed. Makes it extremely easy to parse that each of these are individual ruling fun facts instead of an amorphous paragraph containing multiple rulings. The player aids also got improved because in the prototype, the passive ability and playstyle summary were bundled together, but now they're split up on different cards, which makes a lot of sense since you're gonna be reading the passive more often during gameplay, but the playstyle overview you really only look at once. So it gets bundled instead with the component count plus some FAQ and tips on the back. Excellent prioritization of where relevant and not that relevant information should go. Also, characters have cards that summarize all their effects and have a playing against info block on the back to give to your opponent, which is essential for newcomers. Last new component thing is the addition of character talk boxes, because not only are they beautiful, they also do their job very well when it comes to at a glance overview and for just throwing at someone everything they need to play as that character. Game comes with plastic bags for all the character specific tokens, and the talk boxes are big enough so that even if you have the deluxe version, which will have both the acrylic and cardboard tile versions of the characters, you can just throw all of them into their box. Also, boom, QR code on the bottom for all of them. Takes you to their official website if you want more resources. Love seeing QR codes in board games for unbeatable onboarding. You even get free access to the entire art book digitally from here. Like, holy shit, what? That is so cool. Very cool to see even more React art. Also, there's tons of lore and designer insight here. Ultimately, when it comes to components, I don't think our prototype review emphasizes as much as it could have just how functional and cohesive everything is. Like, for a lighter game, it would have been easy to just not have all these amenities because fuck it, game's light. But when playing, it's pretty awesome how no one playing is really talking about components, since everything more or less works as an invisible hand to guide them. If you never think about components and just focus on the gameplay, that game's components are doing good. Shit like how your masterpiece double functions as your health, the chain tokens being able to denote direction and zone location, and how the standees are slim yet spacious enough so that you can position tokens either on them to move around with the standee or on their zone, makes everything really smooth to not only physically interact with, but also to visualize effects for longer chains. And on that note, you get an extra set of chain tokens, so you're able to have multiple games going on simultaneously provided you buy another mat or use something to represent it. For gameplay pros, it's still the same deal with most characters having some unique passive that bends the rules of the game, plus some number of ability cards and a deck of 30 action cards. With only 4 different cards, but like 6 to 8 copies of each. Thus, React still inherits the Prototype Pro with how you can pretty much fully grasp how to play with or against a character after a game or two with them, since there's only so many possible actions they have. But now with the full picture experience of 8 fully fleshed out characters and potentially another if you get an expansion, ignore this 10th one because that's Kickstarter exclusive, the matchup spread possibility is pretty wide, and replayability was something we were kind of wondering about but couldn't really comment on previously. Turns out you get more than enough content with 8 options, because each new character they add exponentially increases matchup possibility. Also, having seen all the characters in action, can I just say that the theme meets the gameplay exceptionally well? Like, I really want to highlight the DJ expansion character for actually having you rotate records as a timer mechanic, which is unbelievably evocative. Is it kind of stupid and unnecessary since it could have easily been tokens or something? Yes. Is it sick as fuck though? You're goddamn right it is. Sculptor haphazardly throws clay all over the arena and can either spend them for more direct effects or coalesce them into chonkers if you need instant quesos on the spot. You got an animator who has an animation reel of keyframes that you gotta sequentially set up on the board before you can activate, aka animate them via one of your drawing summons or the animator acting them out. The fortune teller predicts the future by being the only character that lets you play cards face down to the chain on higher positions than you're normally allowed loud, and there's literally tarot tiles to fiddle with as an expendable resource. Plus, she's all about the number 4, which is an unlucky number in a lot of East Asian countries, cause she loves resolving cards on chain 4 to refresh one of her 4 tarot tiles. Like, I can go on and on about this with everyone. Holy shit, the ingenuity here goes so hard. So if it wasn't obvious, we still got the old pro of meaningful asymmetry between characters where everyone gives a drastically different feel, but expanded upon with flying colors now that there's the full roster, which in turn means way more interesting combinations of ways you can have characters react to one another. You want to have a shit show where both characters are flinging nonsense across the map at each other? Animator versus DJ, because both of them can launch their summons across entire columns and have them attack in weirdly specific spots. You want to break each other's ankles constantly? Tattooist versus Dancer. And then watch how easy it is to lose track of who the fuck is going to be where when they both load up the chain with effects that swap figures and spawn new ones. Which matters a lot because Tattooist summons can be set to different abilities and you damage her by hitting her summons, not the Tattooist. However, those are funny, exaggerated examples where those characters can potentially perform similar actions to each other, albeit in completely different ways. So most regular games of React will have two fighters that are wildly different from each other and cause players to evaluate their game plans in new and interesting ways. Like with DJ versus Sculptor, the DJ has speaker summons that have the option to attack an entire row or column at the cost of expending themselves because they end up hitting each other because yes, friendly fire exists and in general for React is integral to outplay design where you force opponents to hurt themselves. Anyways, in most use cases against the rest of the roster, the DJ will either use this to guarantee a hit if for whatever reason the opponent can only sidestep within the affected area, or to threaten multiple targets simultaneously like summons. But against the Sculptor, because there's these little clay shitters everywhere, there's now a use case to blow up an entire column just to clean up the board and deny the Sculptor's options. Obviously, the Sculptor player knows this, and so they may either place their clay tokens less bunched up, or prioritize holding onto their reaction that can move the clay around instead of using it aggressively. Point is, that core React gameplay discussed in our previous video of thinking through your opponent's possible reactions, weighing whether or not you should play a card right now or wait to see if your opponent reacts, is still here, and better than ever thanks to so much more facets to think about from character to character. And these reactions never feel like bullshit where the opponent doesn't have to consider nuances at all by just throwing out some counterspell, hard negate nonsense to blank your card. In case you're a disgruntled modern Yu-Gi-Oh player tired of current gameplay patterns where you search your deck like 15 times a turn and Interaction is actually just negating everything your opponent does, worry not, React has no outright negation of effects, as reactions to prevent stuff is primarily done through dodging and blocking. Like the closest thing I can find to an actual counterspell is this card to exhaust something, but because reactions can never start a chain, this is always used preemptively rather than in response to something. Remember, you pay costs before the chains start resolving, so exhausting something that already exhausted itself as a cost to go on the chain won't do anything. And of course, there's no constant tutoring because again, everyone only has 4 actual cards with like 8 copies each. Not really a need to design effects to dig through your deck searching for specific cards and halting the game flow. Last pros to talk about are the balance changes, which overall have felt like everything's gotten stronger, not from a higher numbers perspective, but rather from consistency and or streamlining, which overall just makes everything feel smoother to play. Now, unfortunately, I can't go into exact details because we had to send back the prototype, so I can't pull out the comparisons, but overall, there's a complete lack of feeling frustrated over some perceived dysfunction in the final version. Like, I remember the Calligrapher used to feel jank because it would feel fine one game, and then other times you'd sometimes have these non-games where you didn't open any summoning cards, which is your cornerstone mechanic, and have a bricked hand that just couldn't do anything besides like exhaust stuff or draw cards at the cost of ending your turn. So then your opponent would just casually walk up and kill you, or get so far ahead that you're forced into a position where you have to play perfectly or immediately lose. Chances are you can't play perfectly, especially because Calligrapher has very conditional reactions that are much more difficult to use to prevent damage without proper setup. Setup that may not have even had a chance to happen. But now, that's not an issue, because that draw card which ends your turn became an ability. So now it's never going to clog your hand up with multiple copies. And it was replaced by a sorely needed movement card. So now she can actually move around normally, so you can finally position properly and engage meaningfully in a game where movement and positioning are like the end-all be-all for being able to damage each other. The Painter, who has a bunch of dice instead of action cards, also had inspiration completely removed as a mechanic, and instead her action economy is primarily based on expending dice instead of having this fiddly tracker card and token that didn't even overlap well together. Like, it is so much smoother to just think of your possibilities purely via each die as a resource instead of having what was essentially separate action points and having dice as available options. But other than those two, all the other balance changes are more minor because it's stuff like adding a little extra oomph to cards. For instance, with Converging Step being able to now spend more scales than necessary to draw, which adds more playstyle options if you want to conserve card economy while having more use for wayward scales. Again, not really familiar with all these types of changes because no prototype to compare. Plus, we primarily played these 4 characters because they were the most ready. Apparently, the other 4 went through a lot of iterating we didn't get to see. Also, it was kind of confusing digging through old footage and current cards looking for these changes when some cards didn't actually change and instead got rewordings and clarifications on them, which is always welcome. So point is, from highlighting the balancing changes, is that when I was asking around how friends felt about their takes, nowadays it was universal that the characters felt great to play and any perceived shortcomings were attributed to user error. Whereas before, there was a bit more of them saying shit was not working if they drew too many copies of certain cards.
I'm gonna just play the way of yours. You can't play this blind. You have to know what everyone in the cast is. I think this one is you have you have real powerful tools, but you don't know what you're playing against. It's really bad.
I think the only complaint I got was when we did expansion versus expansion, in which my friend said it felt like DJ countered Storyteller for having better maneuverability, which means DJ comes out on top since both characters have lots of column/row based attacks. But that's outside the scope of this review because Storyteller is Kickstarter exclusive, so that's straight up the only game I've seen of her, and we never did the run back because I told everyone ideally we don't pick her, but if they really wanted to, they could. So for the larger sample size of games I've seen of the in-the-box 8 characters, everyone said balance felt fine, and I felt the same way too. Cons! These are pretty much all minor in scale, but there are still a number of them, and their totality is felt tangibly, so let's run through it. QR code on the character boxes all bring you to this official React page, but unless I'm incredibly dumb, I do not see an FAQ here, just the rulebook in Discord. And what was I looking up? Painter has summons that must be attached diagonally unless she ascends, in which case they can freely move around. But then, what happens if you descend back to base form from completing the masterpiece again? Does everything get deleted, or do you freely rearrange them diagonally next to you? Fortune Teller can play face down cards to the chain ahead of schedule that flip once the slots under are filled. But this says immediately, which is the same timing as paying costs for cards, so which is first? Because it's a pretty big deal if you get to see the flipped card before deciding the cost. Assumption is the turn player goes first, because that seems to be the default timing for tiebreakers. Man, if I ever make a board game, what I'm learning is I should immediately make an effect timing order of operations and then design around that instead of after the fact, because it's shocking to me how often uncertain timing disputes come up in board games. More clarity cons. Masterpieces can be hard to visually assemble correctly when flipped over to the black and white side to track your damage. This is an improvement from the prototype con, because in the final version, since everyone got their own unique masterpiece art that's pretty obvious to assemble, with maybe the exception of the animator, because it honestly looks fine swapping the ends, but even then, they all have borders you can line up. But those borders and a lot of the art's detail goes out the window if the whole thing goes monochrome. In my opinion, ideally the borders remain colored when flipped, or all the art has what's going on with the calligrapher where there's different damaged art, which is sick as fuck. Not the biggest deal, because at worst you can temporarily flip the cards to their colored side to reorientate yourself, but also in a lot of games you already have some of the masterpiece in play before you take damage and flip, so you already have it recognizably orientated. I've also seen people get tripped up on the use of first-person language on cards, but only ever on summons where they'll exhaust their character instead of the summon. I'm personally not a fan of the first-person perspective because it takes a little longer to comprehend for me, though if there's no issues, no problem. But man, even the sculptor's reaction has a weird trip up here, because read this for a sec. Why does it say mine and the sculptor's? That's like if I said, hey, come sit next to me and Daniel. And speaking of weird text mistakes, DJ has an effect talking about swapping artists or summons. Pretty sure that's supposed to be and or, because you don't have 2 artists. Could have also just said swap 2 units. Less words if possible is generally good for your games. Also, the animator cheat sheet here says actions are tired instead of tied, because apparently this guy works at Mappa. Also, the box side says 1 to 4 players, which is obviously fake news. It looks like you'll all be getting a sticker included in your copies that says 1v1, because FYI, we didn't get sent the final product, because last minute they decided to put that in and a plastic insert. Last component stuff are things that would be really nice to have, because they were brought up a notable amount while playing. Calligrapher's art still has the prototype con of looking less flashy than other cards, but I want to emphasize how that also just hurts readability, because people can't tell which is which at a glance as easily as other characters. Because even though the backgrounds have different colors, it's really dark and you're not going to always be playing under studio lighting. I get that we want to have calligraphy in here because it's thematic and all, but at least do art like Cloud's cross slash but with the calligrapher, or tilt the scroll and move it to the side while she does some anime pose in the background, or for the move one she could be writing on a wave of ink. I don't know. In short, varied art would be nice for clarity and match the rest of the game better. Then for the cheat sheet to play against your character, it would be really helpful if there was a card count next to the name and not just on the bottom of your cards, because that did come up, but you can just dig through the opponent's discard pile, which is more annoying. game. Final cons, which are all gameplay ones. I noticed it takes longer than you'd think to actually get a game going, despite really simple rules, because after picking characters, you gotta spend like 5 to 10 minutes looking through and reading all your character's shit to understand how to play, because you cannot just jump in and start playing right away since you have special passive rules. It's not just having unique card effects. And if you want to have a real game with actual back and forth, not just randomly playing stuff to see what happens, you'll have to learn your opponent's character too. Which also leads into the next con. Sometimes people forget something in their passive effects. Whenever there's particularly gamey effects that aren't immediately intuitive and have to be remembered as additional clauses, there's an opportunity there to find a way to be on components in a more tangible feeling. Or maybe make the player have to interact with it all the time so it's easily remembered. What do I mean by this? Take the DJ's clause here as an example where you can't start the same beat the turn it ended, which is extremely easy to forget because it isn't mentioned anywhere else on what you constantly interact with during gameplay, which primarily consists of reading a bunch of effects that start beats and progress their timers faster. I also saw people frequently forget about the fortune teller upside for resolving intentions on chain 4 with their passive. Ideally, if you're being giga intuitive for players, you'd either have the mechanics leave no room for forgetting, so like as an example, imagine if the DJ after ending a beat it went to its own discard pile and you had to do something to get them all back and was balanced around that instead, or you make the components a reminder, so the fortune teller could have come with her own special chain 4 token that visually has something related to her on it in addition to the number 4. Also make it blue colored because that's a further reminder that only intentions trigger the passive, not reactions. Last but not least con, going first with an aggressive character is really rough for the opponent. This is like always a problem in card games, so it's more apt to judge how they boost going second. In React, the first player skips their masterpiece phase, so the second player usually gets their ascension first. That's the idea, but in practice, there's two very real outcomes that completely circumvent this. The first is that the second player gets pressured so hard that they're forced to constantly take their stronger character action instead of the weaker progress masterpiece one since they badly need tempo to stabilize. This could very well lead to the first player being the one to actually make use of their masterpiece first by using their lead to be able to afford to manually progress. Doubly so if their ascended form grants a reaction, because if you exhaust yourself to finish your masterpiece, you obviously can't immediately exhaust again to do an intention gained from ascending. Those you ideally get naturally so you don't have to wait till it comes back to the next turn. The second outcome is that the game ends before any masterpiece even gets completed, which means that functionally the second player advantage never came up. And remember that because there's only 5 slots, if both players progress at an even rate, they'll likely end up blocking each other and have to take extra progressions to replace/rearrange. It's not just 3 placements and you're done unless players choose not to block. As a result, whether or not ascensions come into play kinda feel like a litmus test for whether or not the pacing of a game felt solid. Masterpiece completion not mattering means too fast, but on the flip side, too many completions meant, my god, that was a grind game. Though with longer control games, I wouldn't call that unbalanced. I'm not even sure how to better balance this because there is a neat nuance in that going second is way less harmful to characters with good proactive and reactive reactions since they can still play almost just as well as when it's their turn. Which leads to an interesting design dilemma because you can't just do the easy balance fix where going second starts with an extra card. And this nuance also means that this going first issue isn't even as big of a deal as it could be, but it is worth pointing out when an aggro player completely bullies someone by completely outclassing their opponent's meager reactions. A recommender score! Here at Shelfside, the recommender score weighs our pros and cons to evaluate how well we think the game did what it's trying to do on top of assessing what it's trying to do. So React, as a 1v1 grid-based anime card dueler, gets a 9 out of 10. An excellent game. The pros are pretty noticeable improvements from the prototype, and most of the cons found are minor enough so that none of them are ever pervasive throughout your time playing. In fact, the only one I think that will always pop up is the onboarding experience of everyone sitting around in silence getting acquainted with their character, and that's just kinda innate to the design of what's essentially a card game hero shooter. Which, funny enough, is also a cushion for a lot of the cons, since most end up being small issues pertaining to specific characters, so you don't even always see them. Even then, lots of reading is only going to happen initially and stop completely with repeated plays. And was mostly brought up because of how disproportionate it felt time-wise to how fast and light React games are. Point is, with the updated pros and the complete experience of getting to play with all the characters, React hits its description very well, because you will absolutely experience the crunchy decision space of a TCG streamlined down into a board game, with excellent balancing and anime theming to boot. The extremely evocative character design of everyone being artists, where their art comes to life as their superpowers shines through so well in the gameplay and visuals. And the process of learning all the characters, then playing through their interactions with each other in unique and thoughtful ways is an absolute treat to experience. So with the base 8 characters, I think that's more than enough value to ask for the $60 price. The deluxe $100 asking price is a different story though, because at that amount I start expecting pretty hefty amounts of gameplay value. But again, it's a deluxe edition that's a cosmetic upgrade. If you're willing to cough up an extra $40 for 2 playmats and acrylic standees, and I suppose a bigger box is nice if you want to have more space for future expansions, the option is there, and I will admit the acrylic standees do look really nice and help bring the tabletop anime battle to life with their bigger art and verticality compared to tiles. Definitely more of a minis guy myself, but not sure how true that would hold for anime aesthetics, because this art style is pretty unexplored in the mainstream board game space, which is some cultural whiplash because you interact with anybody both outside and online and people won't shut the fuck up about anime. Let me tell you, being surrounded by a bunch of white boys at a party talking about all sorts of anime and I'm the Asian dude there who's only seen like tip of the iceberg shit like Demon Slayer, JJK, Spy Family, Attack on Titan, like damn, that threw me for a loop. Probably non-relatable experience aside, if you're a disgruntled TCG player or someone who stopped keeping up but wants something to scratch that itch with less commitment, and you like anime nonsense, React is extremely high up there for recommendations. Even outside of that space, if you're looking for a 2P game and want to try your hand at something akin to a regular card game, React definitely stands on its own merits and is worth checking out. And if you're still into TCGs, I'm guessing you're still playing your TCG of choice, so there might not be as much of a pull here, both competitively and casually. I'm not even sure how legit the angle is for those into TCGs looking for something similar to play with their non-TCG friends, because I very quickly ran into the issue of because I'm the owner, I'm pretty familiar with all the characters. That's a huge advantage against any newcomers I'm trying to introduce. Also, for being real here, for casual TCG players, they'd be hard-pressed to play anything outside of Commander, because 1v1 is so much less forgiving than bigger player counts. Maybe if React really was 1 to 4 players, this recommendation would change. That mistaken label almost dropped the score back to an 8, because mislabeling key info like that is a surefire way to get angry customers and refunds if you pick this game up on a retail shelf looking for 4P. However, React is only being sold online and in conventions, so functionally not really an issue. But yeah, it's really cool how pretty much all the cons from our previous React review were addressed. And it's just as hilarious that now there's new cons for the new content. Like, sure, there's that old point about how React can be kind of random and you draw a hand with no reactions, but that's just sort of innate to the genre because of course there's variance to drawing cards from a deck. So it's better to argue around whether or not that's done well. Which, with all the slight buffs and ease of use changes so everyone's abilities are more versatile alongside a wider roster so you can just pick characters with no deck or with a ton of reactions, means that point is kind of moot now. Plus, with the wider roster, there's more wackier game states possible. And there's more reasons that can pop up in which you'd actually want to take damage instead of the old criticism of just autopilot burn a reaction to avoid it. Like before, the only reason is maybe if you think you can tank the hit now and on a clapback that reaction you saved is used offensively to get in more damage so you can move in for the kill. But now there's like character specific weird reasons, because the Sculptor for instance has summons that are really expensive to get out. And they provide massive value by throwing out even more clay, so it may be worthwhile to swap places with one and take the hit for them. Clay everywhere is super valuable because it can make your attacks extremely difficult to get away from, not just because you can cover a wide area, but also because you can move them around as a reaction which doesn't announce the movements as a cost. So if that card can be used offensively instead of as an oh shit button to get clay on yourself so you can spend it for a block, you can basically guarantee a hit. And Fortune Teller is a funny one because since you can play whatever card face down head on a chain, if you're 5-heading and planning some hilarious sequence of events, sometimes you just don't react and allow the opponent to hit you because you don't want the chain to go higher and have it reach to face down, forcing it face up. Man, I could dead ass talk for hours about character nuance hijinks because like even though fundamentally React is just moving around on a board and hitting each other, the ways in which that actually plays out is so much less straightforward than you'd think given everyone's unique gimmicks. And it's important to remember that these characters are what makes up the bulk of React's identity. So if you're looking to pick up a copy, enjoy the journey of really getting to learn their ins and outs. My personal score, still a 7 out of 10. Yep, nothing's changed with my tastes or life circumstances really, so React is still just a good time for me. You can go back and watch that personal score and the points still hold true in the exact way. In fact, when getting into place for this review, it pretty much happened over one weekend where we just spent the entire time playing card games because we did a Yu-Gi-Oh! Edison draft on top of playing a fuckload of React. And yeah, React was fun, but it just doesn't hold up to the GOAT that is Yu-Gi-Oh! Not GOAT format, just Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, in terms of having new shit to say, at best, I can offer you new ways of explaining my tastes, cause 2 years is a lot of time in between to advance my immediate diet. For instance, still not a fan of 2P, and I'd rather invite a bunch of people for something more rambunctious. Like 2P only really happens in my life for like co-op games and playing Smash Ultimate. And yeah, if I'm gonna get into something 1v1, it better be something me and the other person have a ton of pre-established interest in already, cause honestly, it's like living in Disneyland expecting to drag someone else into the deep end of your hobby, which is especially the case for competitive games. I've always felt that way even when younger and everyone had free time, cause it's a pain in the ass getting people into something you love. And this is now just further intensifying as everyone gets older and has less time. Nowadays, I prefer minimizing demanding prep from others as much as possible so we can just jump into whatever we're doing with as little friction as possible. And if you raise an eyebrow at the Disneyland expression, yes, I watch a lot of Rarin. But at this point, almost less for the content itself and more as like a case study, cause I'm absolutely fascinated at the more meta aspects of his content and how different communities come together to engage with this card game content creator crossover insanity. And as someone who has played a ton of different card games, that shit is a gold mine for my eclectic ass tastes, making it eventually frustrating listening to someone only talk about one game. Like, holy fuck, Yu-Gi-Oh! Players do not know how to break down their own game and explain it to someone who comes from mana-based resource systems. Weeb card lovers catching strays aside, I bring up Ram Ranch Rarin, firstly to Clout Chase. Rarin in the card gaming community mentioned, let's go! Also, can you believe MBT has played React? That's fucking crazy. But really, it's cause Rarin recently made a video interviewing a bunch of people who are very good at children's card games. And something there really struck true for me, and I hadn't put it into words before that video, which is just how much deck building matters for getting the most you can get out of a card game. Like, it really is peak soul expression. We're all about creativity maxing around these parts. Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime telling kids to put their hearts and souls into their decks actually kinda ate. Cause yeah, I was always somewhat annoyed with how prevalent net decking is, and I always had way more fun building new decks and trying shit out. Cause I always felt that most decks you'd reach their skill ceiling decently fast, assuming you had a good grasp of the game and its meta. Like, it was very rare to see fresh shit come out of opponents whenever you're up there in the really high ranks. Meanwhile, I'm out here getting top 500 legend in Hearthstone back in the days of Undertaker Hunter with Mech Druid, just gobbling them up for breakfast because I had the secret sauce with Claw. Like, I was tracking my stats. I remember my win rate going up significantly just for adding this card. It kills Undertakers. It made Savage Roar Force of Nature do even more damage. It could heal you out of lethal range. I do realize I'm speaking from a very hoity-toity position because not everyone is going to be spending a ton of time and money into card games, so they'd rather spend limited money on a good tried and true deck and just run with it. Fair enough. But also, there's just a lot of people out there who aren't a fan of deck building and would rather just avoid it entirely, which is kind of shocking to me when you're allowed to modify your deck. And I guess this is where the board game perspective comes in, because with exposure to a ton of different systems, yeah, a deck without deck building just makes me go like, why wasn't this a different action system entirely then? I love adjusting the probabilities at which I see certain cards, some of which I'm personally attached to. And in React's case, it is a little ironic that a game which has such strong theming grounded in self-expression in art has no self-expression via deck building. But hey, there's trade-offs to everything. Accessibility does have a tendency to plug up the endless abyss of death and possibility enabled from freeform modifications that are also basically impossible to fully balance, so perfectly understandable. TLDR, I don't really play 1v1s, and even when I do, it's probably established TCGs with a ton of people, so that's still more than 2 people. I love deck building, which also means I love drafting, and as a result, React is a good time, not the best time. That's just me though. It's totally possible you listened to all that and went like, React is fucking perfect for me, so hopefully this perspective helps. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Don't forget to drop a like. And if you'd like to further support us, we have a Patreon if you want access to exclusive content like behind the scenes. And we got a coffee if you'd rather just send a one-time donation our way. Our current donation pool is sitting at $712, and we'll be able to make another huge unsponsored review for those particularly giant games depending on viewer requests if it hits around 3K. Can't spend a few months on a video without getting some of that bread to survive, you feel? Take care out there. I'll see you in the next one.